Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Quest for Truth. Today, as we continue in our series looking through the Ten Commandments, we come finally to the last one. But I first want to back up a little bit, because in the last few weeks, we've talked about the commandments, and then we've kind of looked to a little bit deeper in the Old Testament, and then looked to the New Testament to see what the New Testament had to say about them. So, for example, when we looked at adultery, we looked to the New Testament when Jesus said, do not lust in your heart. And, the Old Testament command says, do not steal. And the New Testament says, don't even, desire those things. And, those kind of aspect of, again, don't commit murder, but the New Testament says, do not even hate someone in your heart. And so for those, those last commandments that we've looked at, it seems as though the New Testament, or the Old Testament law rather, has this idea of what you do. Don't do these things, the things of outward appearance. And then the New Testament has this idea of looking at the heart and what's on the inside, that goes behind those actions. And so we've looked at those things, and I mean, I'll be, for a while I did kind of think like, oh, you have to look to the New Testament to find this idea of actually like the motive or the heart behind the action is what really matters. But that's not really the case. And as we get to the 10th commandment, we see that that's not the case even right here. It's commandment number 10 in Exodus chapter 20, verse 17. It says, you shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his male servant, or his female servant, or his ox, or his donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. So the word covet, it means basically to desire. And obviously desiring in certain circumstances isn't a bad thing. It's not always a wrong thing, but in this context, it's referring to the evil desires of your heart. Desiring your own house, your own wife, your own things that you have. That's obviously okay. They're the things that you have, but to covet or to desire what you do not have is wrong, and it's a matter of the heart. Like I said, this commandment shows us that even in the Old Testament, God was trying to get across this idea that it's not just in your outward actions, but it's in the heart, and the heart is the center of the matter, like we talked about from Proverbs last week, that from the overflow of the heart, we talked about the mouth speaks. That's the exact proverb, but when you think about it, it's the heart that brings forth all actions, and it's the desires that lead to actions. And so you see that, of course, these actions are wrong. Murder, adultery, stealing, lying, those things are wrong, but even the heart behind it is wrong as well. And you don't have to get to the point of stealing something or killing someone, but when you covet, you break the command of God to desire something that is evil. And we talked about this a little bit 2 weeks ago when we talked about the command, thou shalt not steal. And we kind of got into this a little bit because behind stealing is this idea of covetousness. We want something, we desire something that isn't ours, that we shouldn't have. We have an evil desire for it, and so we go and take it. That's one aspect, which covetousness is really behind a lot of different sins, between, murder, adultery, stealing, a lot of other things you can probably think of. But it's this idea of desiring something that isn't ours and that we shouldn't have. It's an evil desire. But there's other aspects we see a couple of times in the Old Testament as well that really demonstrate that God is looking at the heart. This idea of not the outward but the inward appearance. And we're going to look at two of them. One of them is found in 1 Samuel chapter 16. This is right when right before David is going to be anointed to be king in the future. And so Samuel goes to Bethlehem, to the house of Jesse, and he's told to anoint the one which God tells him to. And so he goes to Jesse, and Jesse calls his sons. And starting in verse 6 of chapter 16, says, "When they entered, he looked at Eliab and thought, 'Surely the Lord's anointed is before him.' But the Lord said to Samuel, 'Do not look at his appearance or at the height of his stature, because I have rejected him. For God sees not as man sees, for man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart.'" And so there we see it. God looks at the heart. He sees not just the outward appearance, not just the things that we do, and even the cover-ups and whatever, but he looks at the heart of the individual to see what's there. And another passage that demonstrates this is in Jeremiah chapter 17, verses 9 and 10. It says, "The heart is more deceitful than all else, and is desperately sick. Who can understand it? I, the Lord, search the heart. I test the mind, even to give to each man according to his ways, according to the results of his deeds." And so there we see it, that God searches the heart. But we see something before that, that the heart is desperately wicked. The heart is more wicked than we understand, even of ourselves. We don't even understand the depth of our own desires. And so when we think about coveting, we often think that we're good in this regard, because we don't desire too many things or whatnot. But our hearts are more wicked than we can understand. They're more evil than we can understand. And they always want something else. They're always seeking something that they can't have. And that's a constant battle of the heart to fight against covetousness, to not seek after every evil desire that our heart wants, but to put those things down and to seek the things of God. And I mean, that's the kind of the day that we're living in today. When you really think about it, we live in a time when people will claim that men are basically good. People are basically good. And then they'll, on the same hand, they'll look out at the world and wonder how people can be so evil, which is an interesting to kind of separate those two things. But when you put them together, you understand that men are very evil. They have the ability to do very evil things, to covet things that they shouldn't have, and to that coveting bears fruit. Here in Jeremiah it says, the NASB says the results of his deeds. That word results could also be translated as fruit, the fruit of the deeds, what comes forth from it. Like we talked about, the murder, the adultery, the stealing, the lying, all of those things come forth from the evil desires of the heart, the covetousness of the heart, to get what we would set our minds on, and do whatever we need to get there. So in this idea of coveting, we really find the basis for not necessarily every sin, but for many sins. It is a sin in itself. However, it's the basis for sin, for many different sins. And so I think that makes it really important to be not only this idea of what we desire. Are we desiring the things of the world? Are we desiring things of God? But to be able to look at the root of the problem is more important. And so if you're, stealing something, you can identify the stealing, but if there's an underlying coveting behind that, then the coveting is what really needs to be addressed first, in order to nullify the need even for stealing, because you don't need to steal something if you're not coveting it. And so it's a more basic sin, because it's a more internal sin. It's the first sin, if you will, of I covet, therefore I fill in the blank. And so we should be more aware, I think, of this sin. We should be ready to identify it, ready to put a stop to it, and to say, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to walk down that path, because you know where it takes you. It takes you to the other sins. And so when you put a stop to that and turn to Christ first, you kind of put a roadblock in the way of getting to these other sins. And I think that the Pharisees were known for putting laws where there weren't laws, and essentially kind of putting roadblocks where they said other people shouldn't go, so that they would stay far enough away from breaking the law. But that's not what we're doing here. We're not arbitrarily setting something to block from other sins. It is the law of God that says, do not covet. And so that first sin, stopping that first sin, stops further sin. But I think that's one of the key ideas of this is it's not me, or it's not another man saying that these things are wrong. It's God, and God created us, and God has the authority, the moral authority over us to tell us what is right and what is wrong. And we're ultimately responsible to him. And so these laws that he gave us are designed to show us our sin, to show us the covetousness in our heart, and to lead us back to him, and to bring us back to him, so that we can have a better relationship with him. And that's exactly what the law does. It brings us into relationship when we turn from our sin and turn to love God.